Good morning and welcome to today's McClendon Scholar in Residence program with the Dr. Judy Fentress Williams, Dreams, Visions, and Apocalypse, Alternate Realities in the Old Testament. I had the privilege of attending our previous McClendon Scholar program with Dr. Fentress Williams last summer, and she is a delightful scholar and conversation partner. So you are in for a real treat this morning. We know that you have many places that you could be on a Saturday morning, so we're delighted that you are spending a portion of it with us today. I will open us with a word of prayer, and today our prayer comes from this gem of a book. It has been my Lenten devotion. If you don't know it, you should pick it up. It's called Fury and Grace. It's 40 days of paintings and poetry from prison and comes from women who are incarcerated in Washington state. So join me in a moment of prayer. Gracious God, embrace us as we embrace you. We are not helplessly fighting against racism and sexism and religious and cultural persecutions alone. For you are ever present. The journey for freedom is long, but you, our great God of liberation and incarnation, are with us every step of the way. Whenever we forget about you, God, remind us. Remind us of your sacrifice and of your love and of your presence with us in the midst of it all. Amen. We are so glad that you are here this morning, and I will now turn it over to our Executive Director, Theo Brown.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Theo Brown. It's delightful to see you here today with us. As Heather said, you have a number of things you could be doing this morning. We're glad you chose to spend time with us. Most of you are somewhat familiar with the McClendon Scholar Program and have attended one or more of our previous programs. We're now in our 13th year of operation and have through the years had literally dozens of some of the country's most brilliant and insightful Christian leaders give presentations in our programs. All of the McClendon Scholar programs focus on how we can better understand our faith and live it out in the world, and especially as it relates to our work for social justice. If you want to learn more about our work, past and future programs, I invite you to go to our website, which you see now, nyapc.org and /McClendon-SIR. This has information on all of our recent scholars, as well as a link to recordings of presentations for almost all of them. You can view those at your leisure. There's also an archive page which lists all of the programs we've had since we began back in 2007. So we really invite you to go to that website and learn more about our work. As Heather Shortledge mentioned, we had the pleasure of having Judy Fentress Williams as a scholar last July, and she's with us again today. I want to just, before I introduce her, say a bit to you about how we'll proceed this morning, and then we will get on to her presentation and discussion with her afterwards. Her presentation is titled Dreams, Visions, and Apocalypse, Alternate Realities in the Old Testament. And we look forward to hearing what she has to share with us. After she finishes, the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church's pastor, Heather Shortledge, is going to engage in a discussion with Dr. Fentress Williams. She'll ask some questions, and then the two of them will talk about themes that emerged from this morning presentation. After their discussion, we'll use the remaining time for any questions that you have. And after all these months of online meetings, you're probably pretty familiar with how that works, but let me just remind you, you can see at the bottom, there is a Q&A function down at the bottom of the screen. And you can type in questions you would like Dr. Fentress Williams to answer. Also remember there's a like function. So that means if you go in to look at questions and you see a question that's already there, you can click like. And this is really helpful to us as we decide which questions to pick and answer and have her answer. We'll get to as many questions as we can, but inevitably we will not have time for all of them. Now there's also a chat function, which we won't be using a lot this morning, but it will be open. So we can send information to you. And if you have comments you want to make that aren't questions, let's keep the questions just in Q&A comments or anything. Or if you have a question for the technical team, that should go in chat. But we will again be sharing some information with you in there from time to time. I do want to use the chat function right now real briefly. So if you look at that and can open up the chat function if you haven't, I want to ask you a question as we prepare to hear Dr. Fentress Williams. I want to ask whether or not you heard her speak in our program last July. So if you just take a moment and maybe type into the chat who you are, where you are, if you're with a particular congregation or organization, say so. And if you heard her, just say yes or a no. We just get a feel of how many of you were with us before. And I see them coming in, a whole mixture of responses. It looks like pretty evenly divided. I see people from Alfred Street and from someone from Raleigh, North Carolina, someone from Metropolitan Methodist Church, a whole range of congregations. You can see there yourself in the chat. And it's a mixture of some who heard Dr. Fentress Williams last July and others who didn't. Those who have heard her know you're in for a treat, and we're just glad others are joining us who were not able to be with us when we had her speak last July. Thanks for those responses. I now want to take just a moment and introduce Dr. Fentress Williams to you. Dr. Judy Fentress Williams sometimes describes herself as having a bivocational ministry, and I think that's a great description of her career. Her two vocations are that she serves as professor of Old Testament at Virginia Theological Seminary, and at the same time is a senior assistant to the pastor for teaching and preaching at the historic Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia. She has an impressive educational background that helped prepare her for the great work that she does. She received her PhD in Hebrew Bible from Yale University in 1999. She previously earned her MDiv also from Yale Divinity School, and before that an AB in English from Princeton University with certificates in African American Studies and American Studies. Prior to her appointment at Virginia Theological Seminary in 2002, she was a member of the faculty at Hartford Seminary as a professor of Hebrew Bible. There she also was director of the Black Ministries Program, a certificate program designed to meet the needs of African American clergy and laity in the greater Hartford area. Today, she continues to live directly at the intersection of the church and the academy in the bivocational work she does that I mentioned earlier with VTS and Alfred Street Baptist Church. Dr. Fentress Williams has published widely, a number of articles in particular that reflect an interest in the literary approach, which highlights the multiple voices in the Bible. She published a well-regarded commentary on the Book of Ruth, which I really recommend to you if you're interested in the Book of Ruth, with the Abington Old Testament commentary, and has recently, after a long time, I think she would say, that she was working on, has finished a book entitled Holy Imagination. And you see a copy of it there, of a book which has now recently been released and is available. And I really urge you to look at it, learn about it. It's quite an impressive work that looks at literary and theological issues really throughout the entire Bible. She is, as I said, also the author of numerous other articles and commentaries, and you can find a fuller list of her academic writings on the Virginia Theological Seminary website. If you just Google her name and the seminary, you can learn more there. In addition to her work at Virginia Theological Seminary and Alfred Street Baptist Church, Dr. Fentress Williams is an active member of the Society of Biblical Literature, and she serves on the advisory board for the Office of Religious Life at Princeton University. She is married to Kevin Williams, an MD, and they have two grown children, Samantha and Jacob. The McClendon Scholar Program is delighted to have Judy Fentress Williams with us again now as for another time as a McClendon Scholar.
Good morning, everyone. It is a joy to be with you all today. And I want to thank the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church and the McClendon Scholars Program for this opportunity. As has already been stated, my topic for today's lecture is Dreams, Visions, and Apocalypse, Alternate Realities in the Old Testament. The title for my talk is inspired by our Zoom experience. I've been teaching the large Old Testament survey class at Virginia Theological Seminary for almost an entire year now. And I've discovered most recently that when I'm on campus, perhaps to go to the library or to go to my office, that I will sometimes encounter a student that I have never seen before, in real life anyway. There's this moment where I see someone and we recognize that we've actually seen each other before, but not in this format. And that's the moment where we figure out that the only way we've known each other is in this box, this head and shoulders shot. And now we realize that this thing is just a part of the entire person. And so for almost a year, many of us have presented ourselves to the world in this way, with attention to making sure we get the lighting right and that you can hear. We're reminded to mute and unmute and turn your camera on. And sometimes we discover that we're frozen. So it's lovely to have moments when we get reacquainted with the entire person. And I imagine that there will be many moments of reacquaintance like this in the future. And I pray that that happens in the near future. And as we peer cautiously with great hope into that post-vaccine world, we do so with the recognition that whatever we go back to won't be what we've left, that we are not the same. This year has changed us. We have lived under unexpected circumstances. We are currently survivors of a pandemic, a life-threatening, traumatic, anxiety-producing, depression-provoking, disorienting event that has affected us on all fronts. Many of us would say we are not only well acquainted with the cycle or stages of grief, but that we've gone through them a couple of times. And in this past year, we've also been forced to confront the realities of race in this country and recognize that the more things change, the more things stay the same. Systemic racism is life-threatening, traumatic, anxiety-producing, depression-provoking, disorienting, and it has affected us on all fronts. We have gone through the stages of grief a number of times. And just in these past few days, having to deal with all of the news coming from the murders in Atlanta and being reminded again, it's just as though there's salt being poured in this wound. Did I mention this morning the ecological crisis, international tensions, political chaos, economic downturns, unemployment, evictions, immigration, and the list goes on and on and on. We are in a place of disorientation, and many of us have sought solace, direction, and hope from the strange and peculiar world that is the Bible. And interestingly enough, the circumstances of pandemic, large scale, even national upheaval, tribalism have made it a really good year for the Old Testament. In media terms, we would say the Old Testament is trending. We have turned to stories and images from the account of Noah's Ark and the flood to help us understand what we do when the world as we know it has gone away, and what it is to feel safe and at the same time confined and restricted. The wilderness has found its way into our thinking and our vocabulary well before we entered the season of Lent, because our experiences resonated with the children of Israel in the wilderness, trying to be in relationship with God, but they couldn't stop worrying about having enough to eat and to drink. The accounts of Israel's exile have given shape to the chaos of our experiences of feeling displaced, dispossessed, and far away from home, even while we were in our homes. These stories of long ago and these images form a virtual reality of sorts. We get to go into these stories and recognize in those moments that we are not alone and we are not unique. There are others who have gone through experiences like this. And as we work through these stories, we try on different perspectives and different personalities. We follow the Israelites as they complain and offer thanks. And in the stories of the kings of Israel, we learn about theopolitics. Should I be paying attention to what's happening politically, or should I attune myself to what God says I should be? We realize that the struggle to achieve balance between religion and politics is centuries old. And in the stories of our ancestors, Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and their children, we get a glimpse into what it's like to eke out an existence on faith in a promise that God will do what God said. The Old Testament collection then is a kind of provisional space as we journey through and try to find our way to the promised land, or maybe just home. And as my description suggests, this alternate reality that the Bible affords us is not a monolith. There's more than one alternate reality in the biblical world. In the Bible, there are many ways to go into an altered state or altered realities, and we find in the Bible that these are kind of par for the course. So for our time together today, I want us to reflect on three. I want us to reflect on the world of dreams, the experience of vision, and apocalypse. So first, let's start with dreams. And when I talk about dreams, I'm not referring to daydreaming so much as I am to the dreams that occur when we are in REM sleep. When we're in this deep sleep, our brain produces a series of images, experience, sights, sounds, and feelings. In sleep, when our defenses are down, some experts would say that the parts of us that we keep carefully guarded or pushed to the side have an opportunity to come to the surface. The experiences that we want to forget, the things that we hope for the most, come out. Some experts would go further and say that we all dream, whether we are aware of it or not. In the media, I discovered that in the past year, since the pandemic, the number of people experiencing, or perhaps we should say remembering dreams, has been on the rise. Experts explaining that the everyday stresses of living in these days can partially manifest itself in our dreams, and perhaps our deepest hopes and fears have worked their way to the surface as our defenses have been worn down. I stumbled upon a verse in the Psalms that I've heard many times before, but as we all know, our contexts, our experiences cause us to see and hear with fresh eyes and ears. So in Psalm 126, verse 1, I read, "When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dreamed." When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Psalm 126 is a pilgrimage psalm. So as people made their way from their respective homes all the way to get to the temple, they would sing these songs. This one begins with the dream of restoration. When the Lord restored us, it felt like we were in a dream. The beauty in longing in that simple phrase just arrested my attention. If we've ever felt like we've been living in a nightmare, we know the power of dreams, good and bad. And the psalm describes a moment from the past when God had made things right, that they bring with them as they move through uncertain space and hope for a moment in the future that is as good as the memory from the past. So in these two lines, this idyllic memory of the past is picked up and placed in our future. I find this move intriguing for a number of reasons. First of all, we rarely remember the past accurately. We tend to idealize the past, hence the phrase good old days that were never quite as good as we think they were, especially when the present is challenging. But I think what this verse captures beautifully is that it remembers how it felt when God did the thing we longed for. Without specific details, because we don't know exactly what it means when it says restored the fortunes of Zion. Without specific details, the form evokes the memory of a feeling when God showed up in a way that we could recognize. Think about this for a moment, because often we will wake up knowing that we dreamed, but we cannot remember what we dreamed. But we know that we dreamed because of how we feel. We wake up knowing that in our sleep, something happened. It makes me think of the words that Jacob said in Genesis after his experience with God that we describe as the story of Jacob's ladder. In Genesis 28, Jacob was on the run from his brother Esau. His mother sent him away to find a suitable wife, but that was the cover story. He was really running away from his brother's wrath. And on the way from his home to this other place, the Bible says he came to a certain place and stayed for the night because the sun had set. It was just the place to stop because he could not go any further. And the Bible story in Genesis 28 goes on to say that with stones for pillows, he dreamed of a ladder or a staircase with angels going up and down, and that the Lord appears and stood beside him and made a promise to Jacob. When Jacob woke up, he said, "Surely the Lord was in this place, and I did not know it." I wonder what we experience and feel when we enter a biblical dreamscape. Why does the Bible think it important to tell us about somebody else's dreams? In the case of Jacob, the dream functions in the narrative to confirm that he is the one through whom God's promise to Abraham will be continued. It establishes him as one of the male ancestors. It's the reason we say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. That's what it does in the narrative. But what it does for Jacob is leave him with a sense of wonder. This sense of wonder that he has from the dream leads him to worship. And he makes a vow. And because it's Jacob, it's a conditional vow, which essentially says, God, if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. But in the dream itself, the images create a connection between heaven and earth. There's this intersection between the sacred and the profane. The God of Abraham visits Jacob, the trickster. That story takes place within the context of the ancient Near East, where there were some places that were presumed to be closer to God because of their geography. This is why mountains are a big deal. Sinai was the abode for God, the God that Moses encountered. And Canaanites worshiped Baal, and Baal had his mountain as well. He was called Baal or Baal of Zaphon. The idea being that if we got higher up, somehow we were closer to the God of the heavens. And that also helps us understand what's going on with the Tower of Babel. Jacob finds himself on the run from his brother and encounters God in a surprising place. It's not an official place for the divine yet. Jacob's dream in this place then tells us that sacred encounters can take place in the most unlikely of spaces and under less than ideal circumstances. And this, of course, is good news for those of us who never imagined we'd be where we are today, cut off from our places where we are accustomed to encountering God. Dreams play a significant role in the ancestral narrative. Abraham had visions. Jacob has dreams, and Jacob has nocturnal wrestlings with divine beings. And Jacob's son, Joseph, is a dreamer as well. In fact, you could make the case that the Joseph story is structured around dreams. Now, we're not going to look at the Joseph story, but what I will give you is my own summary. And as I always say, whenever I give you a summary, it is my summary. I'm going to include some things and not others, which everyone does whenever they tell you a biblical story. If you want everything, then you're going to have to read it for yourself, beginning in chapter 37. What we know in this story is that Jacob has 12 sons and one daughter with 4 wives. Joseph is the next to the youngest and is his father Jacob's favorite child. The Bible says because he was the child of his old age. He is also born to Jacob's beloved wife, Rachel, or his favored wife. Jacob demonstrates his love or his special affection for his son, Joseph, by making him a coat. Some people would describe it as a coat of many colors, or it may have been a coat of long sleeves. It was a visible sign to everyone else that Joseph was the favorite. So this is the time when we pause for the public service announcement. Parents, don't do this. It's so unnecessary and problematic. And what happens is that this causes additional rivalry and stress and resentment in the family. And then to add insult to injury, this young boy, Joseph, has dreams. And in the dreams, he has this vision of the brothers binding sheaves, and all of the brothers' sheaves bow down to Joseph's sheaf. In another dream, there are a dozen stars and the sun and moon, all again, which acknowledge Joseph. Joseph has the dreams and then decides, for reasons we will never understand, to share these dreams with his brother, with his brothers and then his family, which causes additional resentment. Note that Joseph has dreams, but does not himself interpret them. He simply shares them. The dreams that he has at the beginning of the story are pointing to a moment in the future. Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery and tell the father, Jacob, that he has died tragically. After being sold into slavery, Joseph finds himself in the house of Potiphar. And because God was with Joseph, he rises to a position of authority, and that works until Potiphar's wife attempts to seduce Joseph. Joseph runs away, but she has his coat in her hands and uses it to accuse him of attempting to assault her. Joseph finds himself in prison. One of the things I love about this story is it tells us, but the Lord was with Joseph, even in prison. And from that space, two of the inmates in prison have disturbing dreams that they cannot understand. They share these dreams with Joseph, and Joseph interprets their dreams. The dreams that the cupbearer and the baker both have are future oriented. Like Joseph's dream, they point towards something that's going to happen in the future. In the Joseph story, these dreams are a puzzle to be solved in the prison. But be mindful, these dreams that Joseph has exposure to are not his dreams. They're the dreams of someone else. And his ability to interpret those dreams will be his ticket out of prison later on. Later on in the story, Pharaoh has a dream that neither he nor his advisors can interpret. And at that moment, the person who promised to remember Jacob but forgot remembers that Jacob had interpreted his dream. And that is how Joseph comes out of prison. Joseph is brought out of prison to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Again, these dreams are about the future. They're future oriented, and Joseph is able to help the Egyptian ruler prepare for a famine. From that point, Joseph is elevated. And then when you read the rest of the story, you'll see how his family comes in. And after a series of going back and forth, they are united. And Jacob's family comes to reside in the land of Goshen, which is a region right around Egypt. I want us, though, to focus simply on the way the dreams function in the story. The first set of dreams Joseph has are about him, but all the rest are about someone else. Why does the Bible have other people's dream accounts? I think one of the things we want to take from the Joseph story or from Joseph's experience is that Joseph's dreams or our dreams are never just about us. Neither are they just for us. To what extent are Joseph's dreams given so that he has the tools to help other people interpret their dreams? And how might these different characters' dreams be connected? What is the outcome of Joseph properly interpreting a dream? Think about this for a moment, because the last dream that Joseph interprets in the story, the two dreams that Pharaoh has, are about 7 years of prosperity and 7 years of famine. Joseph's ability to listen to God and properly interpret the dream means that the world at that time is able to survive. Lives have been saved. Joseph's ability to interpret someone else's dreams means that other people will survive. I want to suggest then that it's not simply the case that our dreams are not just for us, but that we must invest in other people's dreams. Joseph invests in the work of interpreting or bringing to light the dreams of the Pharaoh and the dreams of the inmates. And it seems to me that we want to think then about dreams from God as an invitation to collaboration. I think it is rare that God gives us a dream simply so we can promote ourselves, but that God gives us dreams as an invitation to collaboration. There's something about the work of interpreting a dream that drives us to consult others. Sometimes people say, I had a dream and it didn't quite make sense, or I had a dream about you, and they want you to know because they want you to help them figure out what might be going on. When we understand that the work of dreams is an invitation to collaboration, it then follows that there are times when we must acknowledge that ownership is perhaps one of the most dangerous concepts in our culture. That Joseph's initial dreams were never just for him, the prison inmates' dreams were not just for them, and Pharaoh's dream was not just about him, but about the whole world. Now think about the dreams that happen at night and all the other dreams that God has given you. They are not simply yours. They may be part of a larger puzzle that God has given you as an invitation to collaboration. I think that the story of Samuel's dream is like this. And for this, I want to invite us to look at 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 to 10. And this one's going to be on the screen. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel, and he said, Here I am. And he ran to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call. Lie down again. The Lord called again, Samuel. Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call, my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore, Eli said to Samuel, Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. We're going to stop there and just revisit a story that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I love this story. Again, this beautiful story of Samuel asleep and hearing God call to him. And he had no framework for understanding God calling to him. The only possible person who could be calling him was Eli. So it also suggests to us that somehow God's voice must have sounded enough like Eli's. And he goes to Eli and they have this back and forth. I didn't call you, go back to sleep, the call again. I didn't call you. The third time, the text says, Eli perceived. This is a dream that requires interpretation. But the interpretation requires more than one person. Samuel only knows that he can be called to serve. But the only person that he knows who might call him in his little universe is Eli, the person he was called to support. And Eli, after a while, realizes that something is going on other than the boy making a mistake. Think about this. The reason that Eli sends Samuel back the first time and then the second time is that it does not occur to Eli that God might be calling the boy. So neither of them have yet considered the possibility that is the truth. But in collaboration, through trial and error, Eli perceives and tells Samuel what to do. They worked it out together. Neither one of them had everything that they needed to understand. And what I love about this story is that Eli helps Samuel, even though it was a confirmation for Eli that his own time of leadership was coming to an end. When do we recognize that God might be calling us to stop building our own storehouses and invest in someone else's future? The function of dreams is never just for us. And in this story, God puts Eli in a position where he must help the next generation of leadership learn how to discern the call of God, which suggests that God can use what we get right and what we get wrong. Remember, Eli's made some mistakes in the past, but that doesn't mean that he cannot help someone else learn how to discern God's call. This story is about the call of Samuel, but it's also about the call God has for Eli, even at the end of his leadership, to invest in the dreams of others. These visions or visitations are experiences that happen when we are presumably awake, when God appears and disrupts our normal existence. Many visitations we see in the Bible happen with angels. So I've got to mention this. Mary gets a visitation from the angel Gabriel. Samson's mother has a visitation from the angel of the Lord. These visitations are future oriented, telling us what God is going to do. But visions are something that does not happen in the realm of a dream. So let's think about this. In the dream world, we know that a different set of rules apply. But with a vision or visitation, there's something that feels disruptive because God's realm comes into our realm. And that carries with it a sense of special importance. It's almost like when someone has a vision, it's like that television equivalent of we interrupt your regular programming to bring you this special message from the angel Gabriel. So visions can be dreamlike in content. And I want you to think about this. This one's not going to come up on the screen. I just want to read a brief passage from the call narrative of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high, sitting on a throne, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, "Woe is me. I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, "Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out." Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? Who shall go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." We hear the same words at the conclusion of Isaiah's call that we hear from the young boy Samuel. Here I am. But in this story, I wanted to read it to you so that you could hear words, but see. These words are very visual. And this picture that is creates for us an alternate reality with these fiery beings called seraphs with 6 wings flying around, calling to one another, responding to the holiness of God. In this moment, This vision that Isaiah experiences causes him to realize that he is an earthly being, and whatever all of this is not. There are moments when our encounter with God makes us painfully aware of our utter humanity. And in that moment, in the presence of all of God's glory and sovereignty and holiness, Isaiah says, woe is me. But God says, I have called you, all of you. Prophetic calls are often very visual. It's as if God cannot just tell us, but has to show us. And this means that our language is inadequate to the task of describing or representing the divine. And that the work of a prophet, or the one who is called, is to struggle to find language to get closer and closer to what he or she experienced. I don't want to sugarcoat the experience of Isaiah's call, because God calls Isaiah to difficult work. But to be a leader, he is called to be a leader during a time when things are going to get worse before they get better. But the vision that God gives to Isaiah is not just for Isaiah. It gives Isaiah the information that he needs to help God's people move through this difficult time into the future. The vision reminds him that whatever they experience on this earth is only a part of the entire picture. And that through all of these difficulties, he has this image of God's sovereignty and God's holiness. That is his touchstone. And the vision is shared with us so that it can be our touchstone as well. I mentioned that Isaiah has this amazing theophany, this amazing encounter with God, but that he will lead during a time when things are going to get worse before they get better. And speaking of things getting worse, I want to spend the last few minutes talking about another alternate reality, which is apocalyptic literature. Now, apocalyptic literature is material that comes to us from an apocalyptic community. This is a community that is formed from extreme stress or trauma. And the material that a community, let me say a little bit more about that. This is a community whose experiences are so bad that they have a very good or well-developed dual consciousness. Dual consciousness is something that many people have, which enables them to live in one reality, but be aware of another reality. All right. So this is an apocalyptic community. I'm trying to think of I just read something yesterday. And I can't remember the name of the person. There was a very famous actress who said something along the lines of she was successful because she was able to ignore people who told her she would not amount to anything and listen to a different narrative. That is dual consciousness. So an apocalyptic community has created this kind of literature which usually comes from some heavenly being. Apocalyptic literature has a very strong or very clear sense of good and bad, right and wrong. And our reality is not the only reality. There is this parallel reality that's happening in the heavenly realm. And that what's happening in this heavenly realm can have an impact on what's happening on this earthly realm, and that those of us who are down here are not simply trying to engage the people who are oppressing, but we are engaging the forces of darkness up here as well. That the people down here who are doing the bad things are representatives of the forces of darkness, and the people who are trying to do the right thing, or the people who are being oppressed, represent the forces of light. That whatever engagement is happening down here is happening up here. Stay with me, because I want to try to make sure I get this clear. Apocalyptic literature comes from a community that has suffered so that there is no room for them to exist in this world. And so the space where they exist is created in this other realm. This is something that we see in the biblical world, from the exilic community. We see it from the persecuted church in the book of Revelation, the apocalypse of John, that there are communities pushed to the edge where there is no longer room for them to exist and be whole. And so this alternate reality is created. And that idea of alternate reality we see all over the place. You see it in comic books, you see it in science fiction. The idea is the space we live in is not the only reality. And that's the piece I want you to hold on to, because the term apocalypse itself means to reveal and uncover. But if you ever read an apocalyptic text, it does not seem clear. So I want us to very, very quickly take a look at just a few verses in Daniel chapter 7. I'm not going to read all of this, but I want you to get an idea of how strange this material is. As for me, Daniel, this is Daniel after he has this strange dream. My spirit was troubled within me, and the visions of my head terrified me. I approached one of the attendants to ask him the truth concerning all this. So he said that he would disclose to me the interpretation of the matter. As for these four great beasts, 4 kings shall arise out of the earth, but the holy ones of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. Then I desired to know the truth concerning the 4th beast, which was different from all of the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, in which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And concerning the 10 horns that were on its head, and concerning the other horn which came up to make room, for which 3 of them fell out, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke arrogantly, and that seemed greater than the others. As I looked, this horn made war with the holy ones and was prevailing over them until the Ancient One came. Then judgment was given for the holy ones of the Most High, and the time arrived when the holy ones gained possession of the kingdom. Let's hold that slide right there, because I want you to look at the language here where we talk about all of this detail over these beasts and the destruction that they bring. But then we have reference to holy ones, ancient one, judgment, and then possession of the kingdom. Those are the things I want you to think about. Apocalyptic communities are trying, thank you, that's good. We can take that slide away now. Apocalyptic communities are not just creating a space in which they can survive, but are interested in a narrative around how all these things are going to end up. This sense that things cannot continue in this way, that things are so difficult in the present that we must understand not just another space where things are happening, but what it will look like when God finally makes things right. I want to invite us, when we think about apocalyptic literature, to focus on simply the dynamics of power. Here is my question. What is it that disenfranchised people imagine about God and God's goodness when they haven't experienced much of it in this world? And what is the construct of an apocalyptic message? What is that reminding us about God? One way of dealing with a difficult current reality is to acknowledge that the space we occupy is not the only reality, that the realm of God is real and that things are happening there. And I want to suggest that apocalyptic materials are not just a coping mechanism or survival tactic, but that they are uncovering or revealing things to us that we all need to remember about what it means to be people of God. No one owns God. No one owns God's righteousness. No one owns God's blessings. And apocalyptic material reminds us that our reality, whatever it is not all that there is. God is larger than our vocabulary. God is larger than our known experiences and any reality. And God calls us through our dreams. God interrupts our lives with vision. And we learn from apocalyptic communities and literature to see more and to hear more and imagine more into a future where we make more space in our reality for the divine. Thank you.
Wow, there is so much rich stuff there, Dr. Fentress Williams. Really, I mean, I'm still back on the dream part of your talk, and then all of the vision and apocalypse stuff. So thank you. Really, really a rich morning of stuff. I really appreciated that you started this morning by naming the pandemic and this place of disorientation that all of us are in, no matter where we work at a seminary or what our lives are like. And I particularly liked that phrase you used a couple of times of depression provoking. So I'm curious. I've also been digging into your holy imagination, which is just, I mean, it is such a beautiful companion to our scriptures. So thank you for writing it. But I'm curious, as in this time of disorientation and depression provoking times, are there nuggets or places in scripture that you turn to that that bring you energy for keeping on, or dare I say peace, or even a stability in which you can write and continue to teach this really rich stuff? Are there places in scripture that you find helpful?
Yeah. I was only joking a little bit when I said the Old Testament is trending now, that all of those stories that people thought were too difficult before all of a sudden are appealing. Psalms of Lament. Psalms of Lament have been one of my go-tos. And I would say hymns. I was on Facebook, and one of my friends mentioned that she started every morning with a hymn. And when I read that, something in my spirit just kind of said, that's what we need. And so I'm finding those old hymns that my mother sang, get up and sing. It is a way of kind of reorienting myself every day.
Yeah. There's a text in Ezra that I've been reading and kind of rereading during this time of disorientation. And it's when they're laying the foundation of the house of the Lord, and there's so much noise. There's elders who are weeping, and then there's people who are shouting with joy. And the text says there's so much noise that you can't distinguish between the two sounds. And it just kind of reminds me of what we've been going through. And there's so much noise, and there are people who are weeping, and there are people who are rushing to kind of celebrate and focus on the new life that we hope is on the horizon. So the Old Testament is just this rich cauldron of stories and texts that are all of a sudden they're trending. I think that's a great way to put it. I was also really struck by your phrase in the dream portion of your talk about we never remember the past accurately. And oh, how truth-filled that is. And I just want to take it a little bit to current events and what has happened in Atlanta, and some of just that immediate commentary of this isn't who we are. This is not, and it's like, well, let's remember in 2012 in Oak Creek when 6 people were killed in a Sikh temple, and in 2015 in Charleston, in 2016 in Orlando, in 2018 in Pittsburgh, and that is our history.
Yeah, and it is who we are. It is. We cannot get healed until we just say it out loud. Yeah, we still are. And for me, it's intriguing for a couple of reasons. I teach Old Testament. So I'm always teaching people who say, oh, there's so much violence. And then I'm like, have you picked up a newspaper? We are violent. We are violent. And until we can say that out loud, we will continue to repeat this again and again, and then sit back and seem surprised. This is who we are.
It is who we are. And I, Asian American siblings are, have this ferocious anger right now, and exasperation and horror and desperation. And I think the African American community knows those feelings all too well. And so I wonder about the institutional church, especially kind of many of our churches are white churches. And how do we, and I'm not asking for an answer because this is not your work. I'm kind of, as you challenge us to invest in the dreams of others, and to see that as an invitation to collaborate with God and one another. I mean, if that's not a vision of God's kingdom and God's realm, I don't know what is. And I lament that we are so reticent to pick up that invitation.
Yeah, this is a hard one, and I think it's something we all struggle with in our respective circles. But there is a way in which maybe when you start from a place of trying to survive, that, and I would make the case that all of us at some point in history started from that place, that it is then the desire to accumulate and be safe. But at what point can we say enough and say, now it's time to have a different course of direction? And I, as I was preparing my notes for today, I wrote those words. I think ownership is a concept we have to revisit. The Old Testament talks about Jubilee. You can have it for this long. And then it's time, you've reaped the benefits. You've gotten what you can get. Now let it breathe. Now let's, invite somebody else to have a go. What might that look like? How can churches begin to think about modeling that? And so we're all, we're good as communities of faith, I think, about giving. I think for the most part, communities of faith who can are trying to help people stay in their homes and help people have enough to eat. And this is important work. And we don't want to stop doing that because the need will never go away. Then the next step is, how do we start empowering people? How do we start empowering people? So that they can make it on their own and live better lives. Yeah. And that's a work we all have to do.
It is the work. It is the work ahead of us. I'm sitting here still rumbling with all of the just like that rich stuff you kind of tossed in there at the end about apocalyptic communities, and I want a whole nother lecture on that, because I don't remember that from my theological education. Apologies to my professors. Maybe I just wasn't able to hear it at that point in my life. But I love these texts, these stories were formed in times of extreme stress and trauma. And the church is learning so much about trauma these days and what it does, how it diminishes and deforms our lives. And just our reality is not everyone's reality. Can you speak a little bit about the
Yeah.
stress and trauma of life
Yeah.
and that.
So, I mean, think about, let's see, I want to think of a good example. So let me start with an older example. So the epistles in the New Testament, the vast majority of them are written under extreme duress, right? This church is struggling to not just have an identity, but survive. And so the language is kind of comes out of an us versus them, because the us is trying to stay alive. And so that is a part of the scaffolding of the Christian imagination. Then add on top of that the American experience of having fled persecution. I mean, we have layers of this us versus them. Tribalism is in our blood. And it seems to me the way that works itself out in religion is how we talk about God as though we own God, as though we really do understand God. And the challenge of other groups, but particularly people who are oppressed, is a reminder to us, God, they serve the same, those people over there, they serve God too. They pray too. They hear from God too, which means none of us have it all right. And we need to listen more and dismiss less, right? Because there are things that there are correctives that we can all have when we listen to the other. For some people, God's angry and judgmental all the time. For other people, God's just always wanting to tell us how much God loves us and give us goodies. Neither one of those is exactly right, it seems to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that ties in with your, we only get a piece of the dream, right, and we really need to interpret those dreams together.
Yes.
It's one piece of God's vision for the kingdom. It's not the kingdom. And then your just phrase of God is larger than our vocabulary. I mean, how often do we struggle to put into words God and God's reality and how God speaks to us? And just, it's freeing to know that we don't have the language to communicate that. It's an imperfect.
Yeah. I mean, think about the experience of stuttering. I can't, my mouth cannot keep up. The physical piece cannot keep up with what I'm trying to get out. That is kind of a metaphor for how we should talk about God. That I can't, whatever I've got cannot match what I need to express.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet too often we are so quick to dismiss it, right? If that reality of God doesn't match what I grew up with or what I was taught or what I hold as beloved and safe, then it can't be right. And so we push it away and we dismiss it. And that is that whole concept of ownership. We have to own God. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things my students say, as I get older, I'm becoming less confident that I will be well behaved. One of the things my students say from time to time that will make me crazy is, that's not my God. Okay. God never was your God. That there must be elements of God that at one moment give us extreme comfort and at other moments unsettle us.
Right.
Yeah.
This is just really good stuff. Thank you so much for all of these segments on dreams, on vision, on apocalypse. And I'm gonna unfortunately cede my time and give it back to Theo Brown, who is gonna have some questions from everyone else. So thank you, Dr. Fentress.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to both of you for that great discussion. There's some interesting comments, Judy, particularly picking up on this concept of apocalypse. And 2 or 3 people have mentioned, I see Aaliyah Hassel, my friend from Metropolitan AME, and Cheryl Gravy and a couple of others have mentioned that for them, the idea of apocalypse is a negative concept. And Cheryl talks about how, there's some groups out there that are so unhappy about the world, they're trying to take action to bring apocalypse. They want to see the end of the world.
Mhm.
And Cheryl and Aaliyah's comment is something like, usually I view the world apocalypse with a negative connotation as end of times. Should I be rethinking and reimagining the term? So say a little bit more about that and the popular use of how we hear apocalyptic versus some of what you were talking about.
I mean, I want to be clear that this is a huge topic, and I probably should have, when I was planning this lecture, either made it the only topic or taken it out. But here we are. So apocalypse is about end times, even as it is trying to survive in this current time. But I think the piece that I want to invite us to consider is, what does it take for a community to be so disenfranchised that the only space they have is this space? So that doesn't happen overnight. We see that in the Christian community, in the early church, where we have a community that is persecuted, whose lives are on the line. And what does that do to someone, and how do they have an understanding of God? We just rewind and go back to the image in the Old Testament about the day of the Lord. Again, this is coming from people who feel oppressed by institutions and nations and say, when God comes, God is going to set things to right. And in that mindset, that means God is going to pull down the powers that oppress us and restore things to the way that they are. So this is a theme that we see throughout Scripture and throughout history. It's just a matter of our level of exposure.
There's a question about interpreting dreams that several people liked, and again, a big topic. But someone says, how do you interpret dreams? You don't really remember them fully. What generally would you say about dream interpretation? I know that's tricky territory, but
yeah. So disclaimer, I'm not a dream expert. I dabble in dreams as a biblical scholar, and I dabble in dreams as an African-American woman who culturally has heard little things, when a grandmother or a great auntie, whenever she says, I dreamed about fish, that means somebody's pregnant. Where did that come from? These little symbols that we have in dreams, or people talking about visitation from deceased loved ones in dreams. So I'm intrigued by it because of what I see in Scripture and what I hear in the periphery in my own culture. What I do know is that many people will recommend that if you keep a dream journal and try to, when you wake up, try to remember that you can develop the capacity to have a better memory. And you have now exhausted my knowledge of dream interpretation.
Does it mention one of the questions about Dr. King's use of the term dream and a positive dream, some ways of vision? Just maybe comment a little bit about dreams and visions, how they're similar and different, and maybe the way that it can be used in a positive way like that to show us a future we want to go to.
Yeah. So I think if dreams explore our unconscious, they can be bad and they can be good. It's both. And I think we should think of it in that balanced way. I think in the prophetic tradition, prophets use words to create vision for things that people cannot see themselves. So we can't imagine a world that, when Martin Luther King talked about his dream, what he was essentially doing was creating an image for people who could not imagine that world. He drew the picture for us. And what I love about that example is that those words that he used, that refrain that he used, came from a prayer by Prathia Hall Wynne, and that he heard that there, and we get to see how that image gets reused in different formats and has life in these different contexts.
Several people in chat commented about your example of starting the day with a hymn. had multiple people that really resonated with folks.
Yeah.
And just wanted you to know that, and just see if you wanted to add anything else to that, and maybe that's a kind of visioning. Is that how you?
I think it is a way of entering an alternate universe. That music is a primary language, and some of us were taught that music had to happen in this way, with all of the circumstances right, with the music in front of us, when in fact, when we were children, we hummed when we were moving through our lives. And perhaps difficult circumstances will give us permission to just go back to that.
There's also a question about the whole idea of alternate reality. And obviously, because it's alternate, it's different. We don't fully, it's different than other kind of realities. But then someone links it to how we've just come through a presidency where they talked about alternate facts. And just how do we kind of balance that which we know for sure and that which is more symbolic, and in this kind of crazy context of some of the language that's been in public life?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because it seems to me that the term reality is going to have to be redefined. I heard on the radio the other day, now I'm not on TikTok, but apparently on TikTok, there was a Tom Cruise was doing something, and it wasn't Tom Cruise at all. But they essentially, this is not CGI. It's the next thing where you kind of create the whole thing. So now there's this whole concern over what that means, because now how will we know what's real and what isn't? Who do we trust as our sources of information? So there already are alternate narratives. Something happens in the political world, and depending on what channel you turn on, you're going to hear a different narrative. Now that's going to just grow and expand. So I think we're going to have to come to terms with how we decide what is and what isn't.
I was particularly struck by, and it was Heather mentioned it also, but your phrase about apocalyptic thinking is driven by people who feel they have no room to exist in the world.
Yes.
I'd never heard it said quite that way. And I personally found that very helpful. And I think some of the other questions that have come in about apocalypse, and it seems like that can be create negative desire and positive desire. And it's back to that thing again about, you hear about some people who want to start a war in the Middle East so they can create the apocalypse because they think how it'll start and they want that. But it's sort of say just a little more about maybe, I don't know if it's right, positive and negative impulses that come from people feeling there's no room for them to exist in the world.
Right. So I guess, what do I want to say here? I think that whether an impulse is positive or negative is in part shaped by your location. So if we are saying that it is a negative impulse to want to start a war, okay, but that negative impulse is most likely in response to another negative action. And so I think it's probably more useful to ask ourselves what drives any community to do what they're doing. Because I don't think many people wake up in the morning and say, I want to be evil today. Now, there may be a few, but I would imagine that most people are motivated and believe they're justified for some reason in what they're doing.
There's a question then that just came in about someone who had an experience years ago, a terrible experience where a student they had been working with was murdered. And then as a result of that, they had dreams and visions and thoughts for a long time. And then finally they ended. And the person reflects on how much of that is a psychological trauma, versus more profound theological insight. And I know these are somewhat hard things to sort out, but speak to that a little bit, if you would. I think it's an interesting question. Yeah.
My husband's a psychiatrist. I feel like I have to go get him.
Pull him in. Get him in here.
I think it could be all of those things. I think that, someone said something, and one of the things that looking at trauma helps us to think about is the role that we are not disembodied minds. That when we have experiences, it's not just how we process it, but our body absorbs that. And someone said the body doesn't forget, the body keeps count, it keeps score. So things that we're having difficulty processing here they don't go away. So they manifest themselves in other spaces. And that is almost always multi-layered, right? Intellectual, emotional, spiritual, psychological. It's hard to separate those out.
Good. We're near the end, and want to have an opportunity just a little bit later for you to maybe make a couple of final comments. But let me ask, just what are some of the main lessons for us in our daily lives from some of the things you said about dreams and visions in particular? That you mentioned some, but just what would you offer to us to think about of this?
I think I grew up in Presbyterian church. My parents were Baptist. They left the Baptist church when I was about 2. I was raised in the Presbyterian church. I found myself back in a Baptist church. That is, I've worshiped in some other congregations, but I would say that my experience and understanding of God is rich in scripture, but relatively limited in terms of denominational expression. And I think that there is so much to be learned by listening to other people of faith. That's one when we think about things like vision or just different ways of seeing and hearing. Sometimes we really just need to have what we know to be expanded or shaken up by someone who uses different language.
Thank you so much. And we'll invite you back in just a second for just a final word. I have a couple of announcements I want to share, and then we will have a final word and then a benediction on closing here in just a few minutes. Want to thank you, Dr. Judy Fentress Williams, for a really stimulating presentation, and Reverend Shortledge for a great conversation. I wanted to hear the two of you go on for much longer. Thanks for those who submitted questions. I also want to thank our technical team, the folks behind the scenes. There are people helping this webinar to run smoothly and do the slides and do all the things. Will Timmons and Joe Thierry, I just want to thank you for your good work on this, and also to everyone in the McClendon Scholar Council who helped sort of initiate this program. I know that some of you are probably thinking you wish you had more time to talk to Dr. Fentress Williams, and I want to tell you about an opportunity to do just that. We actually have arranged for her to continue this conversation in a small group context this afternoon for about an hour. So starting at 1 o'clock, we're going to have a Zoom meeting. And it's limited in attendance. We can't take all of you if you want to join in, but we have a few slots left, and it'll be a Zoom meeting where we can pick up on this discussion, or you can ask Dr. Fentress Williams other things if you want. So if you want to join that discussion, send me a quick email at the address you see there, dialoguedays@AOL, and I will send a link out before the meeting at 1 o'clock to everybody who's already signed up. We have a few, and we have room for a few more folks. So if you're interested in talking more with her and in a small group, because you really will have an opportunity to ask questions directly as opposed to typing them and talk, then send me that, and as long as we have room, we'll send you the link to join us at that time. Dialogue Days, DAYS @AOL.com if you want to join us. I also want to tell you about the next McClendon Scholar program. Wednesday, April 14th, 7 o'clock p.m., we're in for a real treat. We are going to show the new film as part of the webinar, Spiritual Audacity, the Abraham Joshua Heschel story. This new documentary has just this week won the Wilbur Award for the best new religious documentary. And we'll show the documentary, and we'll have a discussion afterwards with Dr. Susanna Heschel, the only child of the great Rabbi Heschel, is herself a professor of religion at Dartmouth. And she and the filmmaker will talk afterwards. And I think it will just be a fascinating conversation. So that is Wednesday evening, April 14th, and we'll be sending you information about that. Final reminder, the recording of this program is on, will be in a couple of days up on our website, nyapc.org/McClendon-SIR, and you can go back and review and hear this lecture again or listen to parts of it if you want to do that. And also, again, of course, it has records of other of the scholars we've had in the past, and that Meg is putting that now also into the chat. So we hope you'll go to there. We'll have it up in the next few days so that you can review this talk and look at others also if you want to. All right, well, again, thanks to everyone. And I want to just invite Judy Fentress Williams to come back again, perhaps make just some final closing comments, and then Reverend Shortledge will close by offering us a benediction.
Thank you for this opportunity to think about dreams. I really enjoyed it. And I think in closing, the best thing I could do is read the psalm that I started with, which is Psalm 26, a psalm of ascent. It's a short psalm, but it is a prayer for restoration. And it seems to me that is clearly something that is a sentiment we might all feel. The other thing I want to add is at the end, it makes reference to carrying sheaves, which is the inspiration for a hymn called Bringing in the Sheaves. All right, Psalm 126, when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the water courses in the Negev. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. Thank you.
Dr. Fentress Williams, thank you so much for being with us this morning. And our benediction comes from your own words. So as we leave this place, let us listen more and dismiss less. Let us invest in the dreams of others and see God's dreams as an invitation to collaboration, knowing that God can use what we get right and even what we get wrong. May it be so. Amen.